So while the next group are coming up to talk about community responses, we're keeping a running list of the kinds of issues that are surfacing here. And if you're that kind of personality, I'm sure many of you were tweeting some of the sound bites from there. Help us by handing us those pithy comments that you heard. Courtney, bring the next group in. And just what I'm hearing is the limits to models, the limits to maps, the limits to hard and fixed infrastructure. What are we doing about consumer choices and consumer demand? Where are we with institutional leadership and political will? There's lots and lots of themes they're going to repeat. Now, there are seats in the front for those of you at the back. If you want to just come on down, I can see 10 seats out front that are empty here that you could take over. And I'll give you the logistical instruction as to how you get to the breakout sessions once we're done this session. So joining us now to talk specifically about community responses and ongoing challenges are Marilyn Gelber from the Brooklyn Community Foundation, Andy Smith, who's with Respond and Rebuild, which is one of Occupy Sandy's partners around rehabilitation and construction, and then Katherine Malin from the New York City Department of Environmental Protection. And they're going to talk a little bit about what we've witnessed over the last couple of months in terms of the responses and what they see as the challenges going forward. So over to you three. Welcome. Thanks for coming. Who's going to go first? You want to? Marilyn? Go first.
Okay, hi. Good morning, everybody. I'm Marilyn Gelber. I run the Brooklyn Community Foundation, and Brooklyn is unique in a lot of ways, and one of the ways is it has its own foundation. And I want to talk a little bit about what happened just after the storm and how we started a fund, the Brooklyn Recovery Fund, because philanthropy also has a role in all of this. So not that I really represent philanthropy in New York City, but I want to talk a little bit about how philanthropy responded, how we responded on a local level, and what we're seeing and the tremendous challenges that lie ahead. I mean, this has been sort of fascinating to sit here and listen and learn and watch and look at things from a very high level. I think for us, it's very much on the ground stuff. It's what's happening in the neighborhoods, block by block, the importance of getting people involved, not only in the response, but in planning for the future. So literally within days of the hurricane, of the storm, we said we've got to create a recovery fund for Brooklyn because we understand that resources are important, and yes, a lot will come from government, but also there needs to be a place where private resources come on the scene and where local people can get involved in doing this. So we created a recovery fund, but at least we had the sense to understand this is not something that philanthropy does on its own. So we reached out immediately to the Office of the Borough President in Brooklyn. We have government light in Brooklyn. We may be larger than Boston, San Francisco, and Atlanta combined, but we're part of New York City, and so the government structures are different in a place like Brooklyn. Reached out to the borough president, reached out to the Chamber of Commerce, because again, this was clearly an event that philanthropy, local government, and the business community had to come together. As a result of that partnership, we were able to immediately raise some resources. To date, again, it's going to sound little compared to some of the other big numbers that you've seen, but we've raised over $2 million, and more importantly, we've been able to get money out on the street quickly. That matters a lot. Because we're a local foundation, because we have long-standing relationships with the nonprofit community in Brooklyn, we were able to not only hear quickly what were the conditions on the ground and what are the needs, but we were able to respond quickly. Again, having spent the first part of my professional life in government, one of the refreshing things about not being in government is you can act quickly and nimbly to respond. And so be it a church, be it a synagogue, be it anyone who needs help, you're able to work with the environment on the ground. In creating the fund, we also immediately called in community leaders. That's where Borough Hall was significant. Again, people talk to different people. Some people call local government. Some people in business will call the chamber. We asked Borough Hall to convene leadership from all of the communities affected. And again, the scale. We're talking about but 5 of 18 community districts in Brooklyn. Those 5 districts have nearly 700,000 population. If you look at it district by district, because data is important on a local level, we saw we knew, but we saw the numbers on the high percentage of people living in poverty in many of those districts, the high numbers of seniors living in poverty. I mean, my good friend Pat Simon brought up the public housing community. Well, yes, in this city, we've concentrated poverty in public housing communities. We built public housing communities in pretty what appeared to be isolated parts of the city before we rediscovered the waterfront. So we knew that the issues were significant. In approaching getting money out the door, we did 2 things, 2 sets of grants, and both were significant. The first are what we call FastTrack Grants. We did an RFP, literally gave a week to 10 days to come back to us with proposals for how you would use a FastTrack Grant, between $5,000 and $10,000. Got an extraordinary range of response to that, and again, we were able to get that out into the neighborhoods very quickly. And I want to come back to the communication issues. It is significant. Getting information to people about what's happening in their community, other communities, despite all the sophisticated tools we have when it comes to it on the ground, communication is not good at all. But we were able to push out, by whatever means we could, the idea of the RFP. We got a lot of responses, have made over 40 small grants to nonprofits throughout the affected areas. But then we did a second thing, and I think this is kind of significant. It became clear that those communities that were better organized on a civic level were able to respond better. And so the second RFP was for something we call community collaboratives. We asked that you cut across sectors, if you dealt with human services and or others who dealt with housing or who dealt with economic development, come together because all of you are needed to rebuild and respond. And again, we got some extraordinary proposals back. We funded 2 of them, 2 more are pending. One in Coney Island called Coney Recovers, the other in Red Hook. Again, different communities, different sets of issues, extraordinary ways that communities have come together to respond. And I will say again, looking at the information we saw before, despite our sophistication, as you walk the streets, as you go to neighborhoods, literally it's heart-wrenching to see people around the block waiting for food, waiting for blankets. I mean, what happened to our sophisticated city? Because, you know, it came down to some very basic humanitarian needs. People worked very hard to respond to those needs, and some of that has abated, but certainly not all of it. And in terms of what we're seeing now and what's needed for the future, again, the communication is difficult. The data is important. Having real needs assessments, you know, block by block, building by building, getting neighborhood people involved in doing those assessments, that's really key for the next step, because what we're seeing now, and we had a meeting just on Monday regathering people together, the combination of difficulties, particularly that some of the small home owners and residents are suffering from, caught between insurance claims, FEMA, waiting for repairs, complicated by questions of immigration, complicated by questions of foreclosure. We just did our weekly e-blast and showed a map from the Center of New York City neighborhoods looking at one zip code in Canarsie, the numbers of homeowners that were in the threat of foreclosure who now were also affected by the storm. Well, what's your credit score if you're going to now apply for a loan or some sort of assistance to rebuild? So these are complex, difficult set of issues, and yet we don't have good data really, allowing us to connect the resources we've gathered with where the needs are. And that, to me, last thing, is about this connection to philanthropy. One of the reasons we started a community foundation for Brooklyn is that even though we are in the philanthropy capital of the world, the fact is how philanthropy connects to the kinds of neighborhoods we work in Brooklyn, in Queens, in the Rockaways, Staten Island. Difficult trip across the bridge between Manhattan and Brooklyn sometimes when it comes to philanthropy. And now with the huge Mayor's Fund, great resources that Robin Hood has put together, even the Red Cross Fund, which is huge. How do we get those monies actually doing the work on the ground for immediately, as well as, again, investing in those kinds of community collaboratives, which are critical now and will be even more critical in the future as we begin to plan what the future looks like in communities. And so part of my obsession is trying to connect philanthropic dollars with the needs that we're seeing very directly and very realistically. Something needs to happen to make that connection. Some of it's beginning to, but more needs to happen quickly. There's a dose of reality when you walk into someone's home, someone who has been disabled, is without heat and hot water, sitting in a wheelchair, and the fact that you're able to do a grant to get the electricity and the heat turned back on. We need to have more of that stuff happen, and philanthropy is sometimes up there instead of on the street, in the neighborhoods. And so part of what we're trying to do is demonstrate a model of local philanthropy that's really helpful on a community basis. So that's my story.
Hi. I think a lot of what I say will really back up what you just put forth, Marilyn, and maybe use Occupy Sandy as a little bit of a model of how you might better accomplish some of the things that Marilyn just said. When I was asked to speak on this panel, it was named Community Responses, so I figured I'd start with some community responses that I've seen out in the field. I would Staten Island's a great example of thousands of working class folks coming together to clean one another's homes for free. Totally organized by themselves. In the Rockaways is a great example of communities like the bungalows and from the 30th Street to 25th Street, who are also doing the gutting for themselves, and a neighborhood like Arvern from 75 to down to the 36s on the Rockaways where I work is a great example of a network of faith organizations that are just really banding together, and Arvern still has 1,500 homes without power. So yeah, I think with just to look back for a moment and what I've learned and how it might be applicable to the situation in the future. I always argue that the organizations that are tasked with disaster response and recovery are woefully inadequate because they lack two kind of central principles, and I'd say that they're decentralization and direct democracy. And I'd try to talk about why I think this is. So I think a lot of what I've been up to over the last 2.5 months is just trying to support emergent energy that comes from community members as they react to a disaster. And I really I picked those words carefully, support emergent energy, because it's a very different way of organizing in a disaster response than than most agencies. It's a pretty simple model, and it really hinges on the understanding that community organizations, like CBOs, community-based organizations, can be far more efficient and nimble and successful in disaster response if they're provided the material support that, that they need to succeed. And I'd support this with a couple examples. In that, for instance, community organizations, when given the tools and the support, gather much more comprehensive data. They assess needs, a broad swath of needs, not needs broken up, not compartmentalized needs, but comprehensive needs. And if they're given the technical support, which we were, Occupy Sandy was provided a very state-of-the-art disaster response system called the Sahana emergency management system, which was used to respond to the Indian Ocean tsunami. You're able to collect extremely comprehensive data, and you can take a more minimal amount of resources in comparison to government agencies, but you can apply them in a much more targeted and, and specific manner where you actually fill needs much more quickly and efficiently. And the example is that the Red Cross and FEMA has, massive support, but they end up dropping, say, $500,000 of resource in an area, but they have a very difficult time trying to find out who needs that resource and tell people in the community how to get that resource. And so that's just an example of how this sort of democratic principle comes into play. And to flesh that out a little bit more, what I mean is that upon when Sandy hit, me and I would say 10 people, and then 20 other folks as well, congregated in Red Hook Initiative, which is a community center in Red Hook, and sat about thinking what our response would be. We had some infrastructure built in the past through Occupy Wall Street, which I'd worked with. We had a net infrastructure set to go, so we quickly could turn on a website and quickly begin posting what community organizations all around New York were responding to Hurricane Sandy. And so within 5 days, we have the only comprehensive website in New York that lists every place that you can get food and shelter and blankets in New York. And it's an immediate resource that wasn't provided, but it was we were driving around New York in our cars, and I was calling up my friend Michael Badger behind the computer to tell, okay, well, the Rockaway is on 38th Street, there's a church, it looks like they're putting together a relief site, and we could, real time start posting this up. And that's and at the same time what we were doing, and when I say support emergent energy, is we had, $800,000 in in-kind donations to distribute through Occupy Sandy. And because, when I said that community organizers are, I think, very, very good at dealing with this task of responding to disasters, is because community organizers know what leadership identification means. They know how to see when people are taking initiative in their communities, and they know how to support that. And that's a very different kind of response to a disaster than other agencies. So supporting means, oh, okay, you, Mrs. Doe, you're you run the action center, it's below a block of NYCHA housing. What do you need? Here's my phone number. Okay, give me a set itemized list of what you're distributing. We'll put it into emergency management resource system, which will match that need to a resource that we have in our system and deliver. And it's as easy as that. And that's the democratic character of it, is this understanding that Mrs. Doe in the Rockaways is the authority on her area, not other authorities from outside. She is the authority and therefore deserves, all the support that she can get. I also said decentralized as a principle of how one responds to a disaster like this, and that in that I would just say that that's a statement about what it what it means to have an organization that isn't afraid to act autonomously, which means one node can act without asking the sort of central body whether to act or not. You saw this in real time with thousands of Red Cross ambulances parked on the Air Force field on the way into the Rockaways, unable to get the order to go into the Rockaways. And you'll always see this kind of a little slower response. Again, I argue that it's much more a structural inadequacy, not necessarily someone making a mistake or an official not making the right call. It's a structural inadequacy in the organization that makes it difficult to respond, not a I don't think there's anyone to blame, for instance, a singular individual. And so, yeah, I think that, moving forward, we really have to understand that when you adopt a more democratic and decentralized model of response to a crisis like this, you then are able to build structures that are a lot more resilient in the future. And when I say that, I mean that these structures need to they naturally empower community and therefore bring community into the response, provide jobs, provide expertise, don't source everything from the outside, as we're seeing. You're seeing a huge swath of organizations come in from outside of New York right now who are vying for this federal money. And you build in education for the future. I mean, by working with community and helping to support that energy, you build in educational programming on climate change that in the working classroom of the world out there in the Rockaways, where people can see the cause and they can see a solution and they're given the resources to achieve that solution. And I just think that in the future, and with what we've learned from New Orleans, and I was there, and when you see what happens when a community isn't supported, when you lose 30% of a population, you see massive privatization that follows a disaster like this, you understand that there is a different response that we need to think about and undertake in the future. And it's a matter of will, and it's also a matter of just having different principles when you begin. And I think we'll talk more about ongoing challenges, but I would put that forward as community response.
Now government.
Government. Right, my name is Katherine Malin, and in mid-November I was the deputy commissioner running the capital program for the New York City Department of Environmental Protection. But I got a call from the deputy mayor, Cass Holloway, says, I need you over at OEM this afternoon. And my life changed that day. It's been all about the Sandy recovery. We launched an innovative program, pilot program, had never been done in the history of FEMA recovery, to rather than bring trailers in to provide temporary housing for people affected by the storm, or to move them out of town where there is more available housing, FEMA worked with us to launch a program to shelter people in place. And the program is about providing a free service by the government to repair people's electrical and heating systems and hot water systems so that they can get back into their homes more quickly and begin to make the permanent repairs that they need to get back into their home. So the weekend before Thanksgiving, it was a Friday morning at 10 a.m., and I was over at the mayor's office, and FEMA was having a hard time getting the contracts launched to do this program, and we'd been waiting about 2 weeks for them to be able to do that here in New York City. And it's not an easy thing putting out major contracts like this here, especially for a federal agency that's not used to doing business here. And they couldn't get a contract moving to get this work done. And Deputy Mayor turned to me 10 a.m. on Friday morning and says, "Can we do this?" And I'm like, "Absolutely, we can do this." By Saturday night, we had written a request for expressions of interest to, had released it out on the street to solicit contractors, largest contractors in New York City, to help us launch this program. So the proposals were due Monday morning, and this was $500 million worth of contracts. And by Monday afternoon, we had made selections of 6 very large contractors here in the New York City area. And by Monday night, we had gotten them all to sign a term sheet, which would allow them to work. And by Tuesday morning at 7 a.m., the city's team and the contractors were at City Hall for a kickoff meeting. This was the week, right, of Thanksgiving. That week, they all got to work building their staging areas throughout the whole impacted area. We distributed each of the 6 contractors by geography. They started building their staging areas, building their contracting, subcontracting capacity, and by the week after Thanksgiving, they were starting to get into people's homes to start making the repairs. 15,000 residents in New York City enrolled in this program, which opened up in mid-November, and enrollment is ending Monday, 2 days from now, and there's still a few trickling in, but 15,000 enrolled. By the time that we could get to homes, a lot of times people had the resources and the means to do the repairs themselves, so we've had about 3,000 opt-outs so far. So there's about 12,000 homes that are in the program. We have, I have my data here. When you work in the Bloomberg administration, you get very good at data. So we finished 4,200 homes. So that's 4,200 people who used our program to get their power back on, to get their heat back on, and to have hot water in their homes so they could essentially shelter in place. We're in another 2,000 homes where repairs are underway, and we probably have somewhere around 6,000 more to go. In December, it was slow getting people ramped up, getting these contractors ramped up. A lot of these contractors have experience working in residential homes, so there's a big learning curve. So in December, we were probably getting anywhere from maybe 80 to 100 homes a day done. In the last week, we've really turned a corner, and we're now getting about 200 homes completed a day. I think by the end of February, we're going to be completed with this program. So what we do is we go into the home, we do an assessment to understand the damages, and then we come in and rip out all of the drywall and any of the drop ceilings and flooring that was water absorbing, and remove that from the home. We remove all of the electrical work that was submerged because it's unsafe, and we replace it with code compliant electrical equipment. If the boiler was submerged, we'll come in and replace the boiler with a new boiler. The same with the hot water heater. And then there's other minor repairs to the home just to make sure it's livable. So for instance, if a window was broken, we'll put plywood on the outside of the window so that the home is weather protected. And it's considered a temporary improvement to the home so that we don't impact the homeowner's ability to maximize their FEMA benefit for permanent repairs in their home. So it's very important that people view this as a temporary repair to their home, although some of the scope that we provide for these homeowners has the appearance of being permanent. So we don't impact the ability of the homeowner to have FEMA come to their home and do an assessment and give them their maximum allowable money to make some of the permanent repairs in their homes. But we also didn't want to roll out a program that was so temporary that a month later you'd see all of this stuff that we'd put in the home out on the curb being disposed of. We didn't want this to be a disposable program. So I think all in all, despite a rough start, and the learning curve that we were on. I think this is going to be viewed as a highly successful program for FEMA to use in the future in other disasters. We hear stories after Katrina of trailers still being parked in front of people's homes, and people that were moved out of town to live somewhere else who never came home, people that didn't have the means to repair their homes so that they could get back into these communities. So, I mean, I applaud FEMA and the city for doing something new and different and jumping in and giving it everything they had to prevent some of the mistakes maybe, or some of the after effects of the Katrina impact from happening here in New York City. So it'll be interesting, and as we wrap this program up, hopefully by around the mid to end February period, we're going to sit down with FEMA and do a lessons learned, and come up with a more, this is a pilot program, but hopefully they add it to their permanent toolbox of what they can do in a community devastated like this. So it's been very exciting to be a part of something like this. It is an incredible amount of hard work, but at the end of the day, it feels really good to help these people get back into their homes and to help them speed up the opportunity to recover and to help bring these neighborhoods back and these small businesses back more quickly than maybe otherwise would be possible. So.
Do you want to talk a little bit about ongoing challenges? Andy, I heard you mention that. Do you want to speak to ongoing challenges? Or Marilyn, whoever? Go for it. Grab your mic.
No, I think actually a conversation between us would be great,
go
too.
for it.
As well as the challenges, because I think what Katherine was talking about, extraordinarily ambitious, really important approach to dealing with this huge problem that we face. But, doing it in a way that also allows more local support, by way of local contractors, local businesses. I mean, it's almost like a little local stimulus plan, if you will. And part of what we were able to do using some private monies or get some of those partnerships. And I do think, as a model for the future, what the city has done here to step in with the rapid repair is really significant. But there's another component that I think, given the vibrant nonprofit community, the small business community, somehow including them in this model in some way from the get-go, I just think is sort of really important.
Yeah. So I think I have some ideas in that regard. On rapid repairs, I think it's an easy target to harp on. If you don't have power in your home, you're mad at rapid repairs. If you do, you're grateful. So I won't focus too much on that one. On housing, I think that there's going to be a debate about whether bringing in trailers was needed in this situation. I think there's going to be a long debate on that, and I urge you to, when you go over lessons learned, to really think about the kind of displacement that happened. Housing people in hotels in like the Upper West Side is not an option for people. Low-income communities in the Rockaways. In fact, you're creating more problems than you probably had in the first place. So that the housing issue, I think, is still much up for debate as to how to respond to that. There were parking lots and places to put trailers, and trailers can be removed. And keeping people in the proximity of their homes and their communities throughout a crisis is of utmost importance. I think as far as, moving forward in how we're going to make this a really inclusive process, because I think again the the immediate surge of relief is really important. I would never say that it's not, and I think it should come from all sectors. It's not like Occupy Sandy could do this itself. The federal government and the things that came in to help people, we could have never mobilized something like rapid repairs ourselves. Not yet. But I think that moving forward, as you use New Orleans as an example, the rebuilding process is where things get really, really hairy. So you saw the mass privatization of New Orleans, and those forces are here. Let's not kid ourselves. We have the highest real estate value in the entire world. What's coming down and is really it's going to be a monumental challenge. And so, as an example, the Empire Development Corporation, which did the downtown Brooklyn redevelopment, which displaced the historic African American shopping district called Fulton Mall, is the same organization that's tasked with the two main groups that are part of the Sandy Recovery New York Task Force. So that's just it's important to see where forces are and to understand what our challenges are going to be moving forward, who we're going to have to face up to. And community-controlled redevelopment, rebuilding plans are not unheard of at all. We have some incredible architects in this room who I have done community-led rebuilding and visioning sessions. I think I might have even spotted a picture of one on the data briefing, which was great. And it's by no means unheard of. It's not so hard to do. It just involves a marriaging of expertise and community organizing. And I think that's a really interesting frame for the future, is because a protester like myself has done a lot of trying to get institutions to do something, lots of advocacy work, so to speak. And in a moment like this, you have a great opportunity to marry advocacy with actual rebuilding and make sure that those two gears are working in concert. And that's a real possibility now, and I challenge the folks in this room to take that on.
Kathryn, do you want to add anything? In terms of ongoing challenges, do you want to speak to anything coming down the pike? Go.
Well, for us, it's a short-term program. The scope will be pretty much completed in February, so I don't foresee too many ongoing challenges after we've wrapped up our program. There'll be other things that come, after us to help with the permanent rebuilding of these homes and the communities. But
if I could add to that, though, because the alignment of public resources, private resources continues to be a tremendous challenge. The neighborhoods are nowhere near rebuilt to the point where they're well-functioning communities. And I think, from our perspective, investing in these kind of community networks, community collaboratives, and the city has a really important role in that as well. Again, giving us the sort of data that we can all look to understand conditions on the ground. I think there's, again, I know you were speaking just from the perspective of the one program, but looking forward, this administration, next administration, there's so many lessons that we need to get from what's happened here. And again, this alignment of resources, alignment of interest has to be at the top of our agenda.
Thank you. Well, would you join me in thanking these folks for being part of the session? Thank you.